Hi, Robert.
Hi.
So today we are going to talk about forgiveness in the course. And I think for the most part, students understand that forgiveness is the course's central teaching. And yet there is some confusion because oftentimes what we assume, believe, or have been taught about forgiveness is at odds with what the course actually says. And so in today's episode, we are going to talk about the course's conceptual approach to forgiveness. And then we're going to go into more of a practical approach to forgiveness using a composite forgiveness exercise that you've compiled. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I am too. This is, as you say, the central teaching in the course. I think we all know that what the course means by forgiveness is not what is conventionally meant.
Mm-hmm.
So we know, in a sense, what it isn't. I think then where the confusion is we don't know what it is, what the new meaning is. And also, I think we've soaked in some attitudes that really come from the topic of forgiveness as it exists in the culture now. You know, there's a psychological study of forgiveness, and we've taken in some of those attitudes. And I just think it's a bit of a mess. So I'm hoping we can clear that up.
Yeah, it seems like we know what forgiveness isn't, but we don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm looking forward to kind of clarifying all of that today.
Let
So,
me just mention something as kind of amusing. We used to do these forgiveness retreats in Sedona,
uh-huh.
like practically, no, this is 20 years ago. And a couple of the retreats, I started out by listing common misconceptions about forgiveness. So we think it's this, we think it's that, and about 6 or 7 of those. And afterwards, sometimes somebody would say to me, all those misconceptions, that's exactly what I thought forgiveness was. Now I'm
Well,
totally confused.
Well, can you talk just a bit before we get into your notes here about what some of those misconceptions are? Because when I said just now, we know what forgiveness isn't, I imagine that there's some listeners who are thinking, well, I don't know what it isn't. So just clarify that quickly.
The misconceptions.
Yeah, the misconceptions.
I don't have the list in front of me, but one of the main ones is we don't forgive the other person since they didn't do anything. We forgive ourselves for judging them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's not it.
Okay. Well, even as you say that, I'm like, that's actually related to one of these points. So we're going to get into some of those
Yeah,
misconceptions as we
yeah.
go through the sheet here. So, all right, here we go. Point number one,
Okay.
as usual.
Yeah. Okay. So point number 1 is the ego is primarily manifest. This is how the ego shows up in our lives in its perception of a world that attacks us and deserves our anger and retribution. So the ego shows up in many ways, but the main way it manifests is this seemingly innocent, objective perception of the world that we have, in which the world's constantly causing us pain in little and large ways, justifying our anger and justifying our retaliation.
Yeah, and who can't relate to that? Like going through your day, seeing a world that is attacking you, people that are attacking you in all kinds of different forms. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's all kinds of reasons to forgive. As you
Right.
guys
So we think we think this is an objective view of the world. What we don't realize is this is the ego. This is the core problem in our psyche manifesting itself. And because this is the way the ego manifests, this is why forgiveness is the central teaching. Forgiveness is the antidote to this problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good place to start, is to think about all the different ways that we feel attacked as we go through our day.
Yeah. Well, I used to do an exercise like that in workshops where I would say, okay, sit down right now, and they were seated already, and write down anything that you feel is impinging on your peace right now, such that if it were different, you'd feel better. And people could make long lists of the things that they felt were essentially attacking them
Mm-hmm.
that very moment. It could be as simple as the temperature in the room, it could be bugs, it could be other participants in the workshop that they felt weren't being appropriate. It could be financial worries that they were carrying into the work. It ended up being a list that could be 10, 20, 30, 40 items long for one moment.
Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is we constantly feel attacked
Right.
in,
Right.
in this world. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sets us up for forgiveness being the solution.
All right.
Okay. Number two, conventional forgiveness, how we usually understand forgiveness, is about keeping that perception while letting go of the anger and refraining from the retribution. So the idea is, yeah, the world's attacking me. Yeah, I deserve to feel angry and to get some kind of retribution, but I'll let go of the anger and I'll refrain from retaliating. And that's how we think of forgiveness. I'm not going to question that I was attacked, that I deserve the anger, but while deserving it, I won't indulge in it. I'll let it go.
Yeah, and I think so much of conventional forgiveness is not really letting go of anger, but avoiding it altogether. So it's not that we're releasing the anger, like getting to the root of it and dismantling it at that level, but we're just not looking at it. We're denying that it exists. That's
Mhm.
what I see in relation
I
to this
think
point.
the ideal we hold is we let go of the anger, but I think in practice, it's mainly what
We're not
you're saying.
looking. Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of just, sticking it in a box somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the South, and one thing that's coming to me is we always say, "Oh, bless her heart," like, and
Right.
then, like,
Right.
God bless her heart. I'm still holding on to. I'm just going to avoid it, and that is not what you're talking about here. So why does keeping the perception while letting go of the anger not work?
Well, that's a good question. The fact is, it doesn't work because the feeling of anger is simply the emotional effect of having that perception. You can't have the perception. You can't keep it and release the anger because like it's kind of like the perception is the flash of lightning and the anger is the clap of thunder.
Mm-hmm.
You
They're
can't.
related. Mm-hmm.
They absolutely go together. So if you see the situation as I was unjustly attacked and wounded, that's what happened, then anger is the automatic effect of that. You can't keep the cause and let go of the effect.
Why do you think we like to keep the cause so much? I mean, we love to keep a hold of our grievances. Why is that?
Ultimately, it's just the ego reinforcing itself. We feel safety in reinforcing our ego. But I think, in sort of more everyday terms, saying I was wronged is basically saying I deserved better. I am better than what they said I am. Is kind of maintaining a certain kind of self-esteem in the face of what happened to us by saying that what happened was wrong. It did not fit us. We didn't deserve that.
And as long as you know that I deserve better, then you'll be guilty and I'll be innocent. And therefore, I'm clean and you're imperfect.
Yeah, I think it's kind of our struggle to restore our self-esteem when it's been wounded.
At the expense of holding someone else in chains.
Well, yeah, that's essential to how we think we should restore it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So anything else? Are we
I don't.
pushing through this too quick?
No, we aren't. No, it's still going to take us a long time.
Okay.
Don't
Usually
worry.
does.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't worry, we'll get wordy.
Okay. So number 3, this forgiveness feels like an undeserved gift and a sacrifice of our rights. We therefore only engage in it for some perceived gain to our ego. It also implicitly condemns and puts beneath us the one we forgive. So we feel like, okay, if I'm giving up the anger, if I'm giving up the right to retaliate, I've sacrificed my rights. and this person doesn't deserve that gift. Why would I do that? Give an undeserved gift, sacrifice, valued rights of mine? I'd only do that if I see some kind of gain for my ego. One of the big gains is if I forgive, I'm better, right? I'm on a higher moral plane than you. You attacked me, I forgive you.
Because you're spiritual.
Because I'm so spiritual. I'm the better person.
And you
so
can't
that's one.
help it, so
You can't help, right? Right. You're a prisoner of your past. Thankfully, I'm not. And there's that game to the ego, and then part of that game to the ego is we get to put down the person we forgive. Right? You deserve my anger. You deserve my retribution, you sinner. And then you're beneath me because you attacked and I'm forgiving. So there's there's a gain to the ego, or it wouldn't sacrifice its rights.
yeah, and that's what I was getting at before. I mean, I think there's why do we hold on to our grievances? Well, there's all these different forms. One is we hold our grievance to keep the other person in chains so that they meet our needs. As long as they're in the cage, they're going to meet our needs if we make them feel guilty. And then there's that, well, what you're saying, there's that where we view ourselves as being better than, more spiritual, and above. And so when we think about, okay, well, why aren't we forgiving? It's important to, I think, look at what are the forms in which we're benefiting from holding on to these grievances. Are there any more that you can think of related to this point?
Well, there's that whole discussion in the Song of Prayer supplement about forgiveness to destroy. And that has a list of different forms of forgiveness that really are poisonous. They're intended to destroy. I can't think of the rest of the list. I mean, you mentioned one. I'll forgive you if you meet my needs.
Right. And
Another
forgiveness I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Another one is that, I forgive you because I'm a sinner too.
Right. And when you say forgiveness to destroy just means that it's forgiveness, but it has the intention to separate.
It has the intention to attack. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the idea is forgiveness in itself is meant to be a kind and benevolent and compassionate gesture. But the way that we engage in it conventionally has this dark underbelly of attack.
Yeah, and there's a couple. If you want to just go over the forms. So in the first group, there's a form in which a better person, quote unquote, better person, deigns to stoop to save a baser one from what he truly is. Forgiveness here rests on an attitude of gracious lordliness so far from love that arrogance could never be dislodged. Who can forgive and yet despise? Yeah, that's what you were referring to.
And then there's we're both sinners. Then there's the martyr who forgives while showing the silent face of attack. And there's I'll forgive you if you meet my needs.
Yeah, I like this in paragraph 6. Forgiveness to destroy can also take the form, by the way, when we say paragraph 6, we're talking about the Song of Prayer supplement in the course. Paragraph 6, forgiveness to destroy can also take the form of bargaining and compromise. Quote, I will forgive you if you meet my needs, for in your slavery is my release. That's a big one too.
Yeah, and all those forms are great. What they show as a whole is that there is this dark underbelly where we forgive. We will only sacrifice our rights if our ego can gain something. And it's a gain that happens at the other person's expense.
Mm-hmm.
The one we're forgiving.
Mm-hmm. So I'll forgive you as long as I'm better than you in the process of forgiving you, or I'll forgive you as long as I can hold you captive in your own guilt.
Right. And and I'm sure there are many other forms than that, but the point is that conventional forgiveness has a dark side.
Can you say more? I don't want to park you here too long, but can you say more about this form of forgiveness to destroy in paragraph 3, where it says, the one who would forgive the other does not claim to be better. Now he says instead that here is one in whose sinfulness he shares, since both have been unworthy and deserve the retribution of the wrath of God. This can appear to be a humble thought and may indeed induce a rivalry in sinfulness and guilt. It is not love for God's creation and holiness that is his gift forever, can his son condemn himself and still remember him? Can you say more about that form of forgiveness to destroy?
Well, I mean, the way it's written, it really brings to mind what would happen in, say, a Christian context. And I mean, my old teaching partner, Alan Watson, he really related to this from his church days. Well, we're both sinners, so I can forgive you. But there is a secular form, and we do it all the time. It's okay. I do it too.
And then is that an excuse to keep on doing the same behaviors that require forgiveness in the first place? Like, we're all sinners, so I'm going to keep on doing this thing.
I guess it could be, but I think the thing that Jesus is mainly objecting to there is that forgiveness is ultimately rooted in a very lofty view of the person you're forgiving as well as of yourself. And here, the basis for your forgiveness is both of you are down in the gutter of sin.
Mm.
And so it's ultimately a condemnation of both of you.
That's fascinating. I mean, I do think that it's a very worthwhile exercise to look at these forms of forgiveness to destroy as we move into.
Oh yeah, that section is so juicy.
Yeah, it really is. Okay.
Okay, so now course-based forgiveness. My fourth point: course-based forgiveness, in contrast, is letting go of the perception behind the anger and retribution, and that's the key. If you just get that one point, everything else, for the most part, follows from that. So normally we think, I'll hold on to the perception. I was unfairly attacked and injured. I deserve my anger and retribution. That's all true, but I'll let go of the anger and I won't exact retribution. It's like that doesn't work. So in the Course, the target is the perception of an attacking world, the perception of being the victim of an attacking brother. If that goes, the rest of it automatically goes with it.
There are going to be a lot of listeners out there who think that sounds good, but I really was attacked in either verbal, emotional, or physical form. So what do you say about that?
Well, the reason that the Course is so long is that, I mean, people say it could have been written in a page. It couldn't have been. The reason it's so long is it's laying out a whole different framework for viewing reality. And only in that framework that it teaches at such length does it make sense to say the perception was an error. I wasn't really attacked. I wasn't really wounded. I don't deserve the anger. I don't deserve to retaliate. The reason the Course has all that teaching is to give us a framework for viewing reality in which it makes sense to let the perception go.
I know we're going to unpack that quite a bit here as we move forward, but one question I have related to this point is, given that this whole concept of course-based forgiveness rests on that perception and that change in that perception,
Right.
how much of that is happening through our own will, and how much of that is happening for us by the Holy Spirit in response to our willingness and our request?
Yeah, well, it's both, because we have to start the process.
Right.
We have to have a sincere gesture of letting go, which tends to happen in doing the practice. The practice in turn rests on our understanding of the thought system. And yet the process is completed by the Holy Spirit. All of that, the understanding, the practice, our own letting go, that is the invitation.
And that is such an important point, because as we go through this shift in perception that's required to get to this lofty level of forgiveness, it's really important to know that as we go into this, you are not alone. I mean, I've had so many situations where I have been supremely upset about something, and through the process of turning it over and and asking for help have had some shift in my own mind that I know I didn't do alone. And so I think that's important to bring out again, to know that you have help as we.
Yeah, absolutely. You have help, but you're meant to do your part to invite the help.
Right. So you open the door, and then the help kind of helps you get to the other side.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a process that needs to be completed that can't be completed by you, but it's a process that has to be started by you. And the course, it's generally not, I'm turning this over. It's generally some kind of forgiveness practice that you do.
Right. Okay. On we go.
Okay, so this fourth point is so key. I just almost don't want to leave it just yet. The whole crux of course-based forgiveness is I had a perception that I was unfairly attacked and wounded, and therefore deserved to be angry and to retaliate. And I realized through the course that perception was in error, and I'm letting that perception go. And if I let the cause go, the effects go with it. The anger goes, the need to retaliate, all that just automatically goes once the perception goes.
But it takes that willingness to want to let the grievance go. And so it's a really fundamental part of the process to be not only willing to look at why you want to hold on to those grievances, but to be absolutely committed to releasing them.
Yeah, and this is where the teaching comes in again, because the course teaches us that holding on to the grievances is the actual source of our suffering. It's not what the person did to us. It's our unloving impulse of, I want to have a grievance. I want to be in resentment. That's what's really causing us our suffering. If we can understand that at first, just conceptually, then we can be motivated to let go.
That's huge. Very, very important point.
Okay, so number 5, it mainly entails letting go of our old perception of the person and accepting a new one of who that person is and what his or her true relationship is with us. It is based not on seeing the details differently. It's not about necessarily seeing the details of what happened differently, but on accepting a new understanding of the person and of reality itself. Now, it's not just about changing our perception of the person, it's also about changing our perception of ourselves. But the main focus in the course is changing our perception of the person. And that's what I feel tends to be lacking in course circles. We just assume, well, my brother's my mirror, and this is about me, and I'll change my perception of me, and it's about that.
Yeah.
Really, in the course, it's changing our perception of them.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about that in this podcast before, where the quote unquote forgiveness opportunity is that the other person pushed some button of yours that caused you to look at your own ego, and you should be grateful for them for that reason. But it has nothing to do with the other person. It's just about your opportunity to look at yourself. And so this is a reframe on that. So when you say that course-based forgiveness involves letting go of our old perception of the person, and of reality itself. Before we get into the person, can you just touch on the new perception of reality itself for those who might be confused about that phrase?
Well, the course's teaching is that the only thing that's real is spirit, which is eternal and changeless and holy and perfect. And what we're doing when we're forgiving is we're accepting that that is true in the case of this person, the person we're forgiving. That person, what's real in them, is spirit, which is eternal and changeless, etc.
And that's the fundamental shift in the perception of the other person.
Right. I mean, I just to back up your point. Recently in a class, I had a question, and the question was: is the way that we forgive people like Hitler, is we realize that their ego showed us something about our ego.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before.
That's exactly what you were saying, and we hear that, and hopefully by the end of the podcast, people will realize, no, that's not the basis at all. We're changing fundamentally who we think this person is.
Yeah, I know. And I don't have a problem. We hear the phrase all the time, forgiveness opportunity. I don't have a problem with the phrase forgiveness opportunity. It is. But forgiveness opportunity in the context that I typically hear it is, oh, it's a forgiveness opportunity for yourself to look at yourself. Well, in this point, in this context, it's a forgiveness opportunity on how you look at the other person. And along that line, I know you're probably going to get frustrated with me for all, all the reading that I do from the book itself. But I was thinking about lesson 78. I know it's one of your favorites. Let
Yeah.
miracles replace all grievances, and it. I think it has a good example of this in here, where it says in paragraph 9, the body's eyes are closed as you think of him who grieved you, let your mind be shown the light in him beyond your grievances.
Yeah.
And that's just for me, that is just a good idea to sit. And when I'm feeling a grievance towards someone else, is to just picture them and the light beyond them. And that is one way to break up that negative perception.
Well, I was thinking about reading the actual words we repeat in that very lesson right before the spot you just read. Okay, so let me just go ahead and read this one. This is from lesson 78.
Oh, that is literally right before what I just read. How funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's well, what we repeat is first we choose somebody that we're holding grievances towards. Okay, and we review the grievances. We review what we're unhappy about with this person.
Do you want me to read
Okay.
that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So we will attempt to hold him in our mind. First, as we now consider him, we will review his faults, the difficulties we have had with him, the pain he caused us, his neglect, and all of the little and larger hurts he gave. We will regard his body with its flaws and better points as well, and we will think of his mistakes and even of his quote-unquote sins. So
Yeah,
we
pretty
sit and
thorough review.
hold that impression.
Yeah, and once you review that, what does this person seem to be? He or she seems to be an attacker who has caused us pain, who is probably like morally beneath us, who is some sort of, almost like a devil.
Sinful. Yeah.
Sinful. Yeah, sinful. So we take that perception, this person's a sinful attacker who causes us pain and is morally beneath us. And then we say this, let me behold my Savior in this one. You, the Holy Spirit, have appointed as the one for me to ask to lead me to the holy light in which he stands, that I may join him there. Now it's a mouthful. It's one long sentence. It's 4 lines of iambic pentameter. But the idea is that rather we're negating our whole previous perception of the person, rather than being the sinful attacker who's caused us pain, who's beneath us. They're our Savior, not our Savior because they've pushed our buttons. They're our holy Savior, who we then ask them to lead us into the holy light in which they stand, that we may join them there. So they are our holy Savior. They're leading us into the light, and in that light, we're joining with them. It's a complete opposite perception, and it's all about seeing that person as something so much greater and higher and purer than what we were seeing before.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that it is a process. So you start with reviewing his faults, the difficulties that we have, the pain he's caused, the neglect, and the hurts he gave, step 1. And then you go into, let me behold my Savior in this one you have appointed as the one for me. You go into the prayer. And so you have to get in touch with what it is that you need to forgive in order to have the prayer come in and alleviate some of that pain.
Right. And I think what's happened is we have thought, okay, yeah, I read that, but where are the real forgiveness exercises in the course? We have to make those up because we aren't given them. This is them.
Right. And it's also the course that gets accused oftentimes of not being practical. And
Yeah.
you don't get more practical than this. Step one, get
Yeah.
in touch with your need to forgive and why. And step two, bring in the prayer to uproot it.
And if you, I mean, I went through the same process of like, okay, where's the real stuff? And then I realized, oh my gosh, he thinks this is the real stuff. And so I, a long time ago, began using this particular practice and some of the other ones just incessantly for forgiveness challenges in my own life. And they end up being really powerful if you don't just breeze through them mindlessly. If you use them consciously, if you understand, if you get into the meaning that they're trying to convey, they do shift your mind.
Yeah, and on the level of the meaning that they're trying to convey, one of the things that's so powerful for me in this lesson is that when we think of forgiveness, and we've already touched on this so far, when we think of the person has really done something, or there is something truly sinful or evil in that person that we have to forgive. And what's so amazing about this lesson and this whole shift in the perception that's required for this forgiveness is that what you're really seeing in them isn't their unholiness. What you're seeing in them, you're not seeing their unholiness that attacks you. You're seeing their holiness that blesses you. And if that's
Right.
all that you see, then how can you not forgive on that basis?
Right. Well, anger, resentment, those are responses to a person, but they're responses based on our perception of that person. If we completely change our perception of that person, then those things go. They're not present anymore. So that's the strategy with the course's approach to forgiveness. We invite, first we get in touch with the old perception of the person, but then we invite a completely different perception in which anger and resentment have no place. And that's
Yeah.
how we forgive.
But this is also so advanced and evolved because I'm just sitting here thinking about, I know we've already gone into this in the trials and tribulations podcast, but at the same time, I'm just thinking about people who have been attacked in the most vicious ways and how tough it would be to really get it in touch with this perspective in relation to those folks.
But it's possible. And there are great stories where people have been, treated with incredible brutality, where real forgiveness happens. And there are stories that come out of the ranks of course students, where someone's daughter is murdered. And there is a beautiful, genuine, heartfelt story of forgiveness. It does happen.
And that's why I think it's important to point out also that you're not in this alone. Like, it does happen because we have so much help.
Yeah. And it happens because we're given tools to do our part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So, number 6, this means accepting that this person in truth is a holy son of God who in reality blesses us and saves us. And it means accepting that his or her body and its attacks are an illusion. So we're making a decision about who the person is. Who they are is a holy son of God. Their relationship with us is that they bless and save us. They don't attack and hurt us. And who they aren't is their body, their ego, the attacks that they've conducted in this world. That's who they aren't, and that's unreal. And that decision about who they are and who they aren't, that's the primary basis of forgiveness in the Course. What I
Take a
see in
look.
spiritual circles, is what I see in Course circles is we've been taught so much that it's all about us, that the idea that we need to make a fundamentally new decision about who this person is, a decision that affirms them and elevates them, that's almost like it doesn't compute. We've just been told so much. It's about you and they're your mirror.
Right. And we've been taught that they did something, they actually did it.
Sure.
And therefore, we accept that premise that something was actually done. And
Sure.
so what this is teaching us is to just fundamentally break that premise. And we don't do that so easily.
Yeah, I mean, we believe in this world. We believe all this stuff is real. Of course we do. But what I'm trying to get at is just, I mean, it's hard enough to let that go. But then we have this overlay of all we've been taught about spirituality. And all we've been taught is so self-focused that the idea that the solution lies in taking my perception of my brother and elevating it up, elevating it in terms of its holiness, its value, its importance. It almost like, well, that can't be it because I know it's about me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. And getting to that place is such a journey. And this is something that takes years. At least
Yeah.
it could be quicker if we were more willing, but for the most part, it takes us a really, really long time to get there. And oftentimes we even don't get that.
Well, I think that, I mean, the Course says if we forgave one sin of one person perfectly, we would save the whole world. So obviously,
But look at the
true,
world. So we're not
right. So
doing such
true forgiveness, yeah, no one's doing that. No
Mhm.
one's forgiving even one sin perfectly in this world. But there is quite a lot of room for growth, right? We can get closer to that kind of perfect, pristine forgiveness. And every bit we get closer releases us and releases others.
And whenever you talk about forgiveness in this context, there's always the question around, okay, but isn't that naive? At what point, if someone has done something, violated our body or genocide, as we've talked about on other podcasts and whatnot, child abuse, that person should, quote unquote, pay for their crime. So where does this come in just living in this world where there are people who need to be removed from society or removed from our lives at a more micro level? So where does this fit in with that?
Well, I think that if we were like incredibly advanced with forgiveness, we could be like Jesus, and if they want to kill you, you say okay, and then a couple of days later, you're resurrected and you're fine.
Yeah, it's
But
the
we're a
impractical,
long
but
way. Yeah, we're a long, long way from there. I think that, if you're truly there, you don't mind. You don't need the boundaries. However, we're not there, and so we have to deal with, for instance, there's this guy, this Dutch guy who like has mastered the Tibetan practice of generating internal heat, and he can submerge himself in ice for long periods. He did this barefoot run in the snow for hours, and he was fine. I'm not going to do a barefoot run in the snow for hours. My feet will fall off.
mm-hmm.
So I have to deal with my feet, not his feet. Right? So we're not there yet. And along the way, we just simply have to deal with where we're at, and that's going to mean certain boundaries. I think we can have the physical boundaries in place while we work on the internal letting go and the internal change of perception.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not, what I think what happens is we tend to keep certain people in a closer proximity than is practical. Generally not because we're forgiving them, generally because we have some unhealthy needs in relation to them.
As we say, we're not forgiving them, we're holding them.
We're holding them. There's something we're looking to, from them. And so, it's those sick ego needs that make us think we can't put some distance here.
Yeah, we're holding them through our unforgiveness, keeping them chained through guilt. Yeah.
And I think that, the thing to do at times is to say the form of this relationship has to change. And in the meantime, I love and respect you, and I'll work on my forgiveness. But it doesn't mean, working on your forgiveness doesn't mean that you expose yourself to dangers that you aren't ready to handle. I mean, Jesus could handle them, but maybe you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because if we're being held to that standard, then no
Right.
wonder the world's in the shape that it's in.
Yeah. So I do think that there is perfectly compatible to say, the form of this relationship is going to change, and to say, and I believe in forgiveness, and I'll be working on that.
Hmm. Okay. I know we don't have a whole lot of time today,
Okay.
so I'll let
Okay.
you
Yeah. Okay.
go, but I
So
could park it here for a while.
yeah. Well, this point six is maybe the biggest one. The main basis for forgiveness in the course is choosing a view of the other person in which their body, their ego, their behaviors are all illusion, and who they are is Christ, is the Son of God. And that we could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, I know. We really could. And that point is touched on in the rest of your points here. But on this specific point, is it safe to say that if we have the willingness to forgive and the genuine desire to have that perspective of the other person as a child of God, we really are looking to see through the eyes of Christ? Um, is it safe to say that if we can get there, then the means will be provided that help to change our external situation so that it arranges itself around our desire to forgive the other person?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, I would think so. I think, it's the desire is key, but we also have to put it in action by doing the practice, the kind of practices, for instance, that the workbook gives us. I mean, I've at times done those just over and over and over and over and over and over again, because it's like exercise. If you want to be a good athlete, you do things over and over and over again. It's the same with spiritual practice. So we need to put the desire in motion. But once we have that combination going, yeah, our lives will want to rearrange themselves into an appropriate configuration, and we'll hopefully be seeking guidance about how to do that.
Yeah, because I want to give listeners hope for because this is a long process, and it isn't something that you just sit down with a composite forgiveness exercise, for example, and then all of a sudden your perspective has changed. This is a long journey, and I personally believe that we have the help both in shifting our own perspective, but in the external circumstances shifting around our willingness to forgive too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to sort of put that out there for those who may feel a little stuck in the mud with some of this.
I've had certain times in my own life, and I've also seen this happen in the lives of people I know or have worked with, where the guidance is, it'll be time to move on from this situation when you've done a bit more forgiveness. Like, you'll be stuck in this work situation, for instance, until you've forgiven more, and then you'll be
Mm-hmm.
released.
Mm-hmm. I've heard and experienced that exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have more work to do. And when you get over that, then something will change. Yeah, I've had received that same guidance.
Yeah. Okay. So, number 7, we forgive the person then, quote, for what he did not do, end quote. Forgiveness is therefore an illusion, another quote, a kind of happy fiction. Ultimately, quote, there is nothing to forgive. This is saying in different ways the same thing, which is that basically we forgive in the recognition that there's nothing to forgive. The person is still the Holy Son of God. What they did with their body didn't really happen. It happened only in a dream. And therefore, our forgiveness happens, but there really isn't anything to forgive. And that's how we forgive.
I'm going to throw in a yeah, but when we talk about, you said a minute ago about someone whose daughter was murdered, and that daughter is still gone. So that experience happened in their life, and they're missing the presence of this person.
Yeah, right.
And so, how does that jive with this point that he did forgive the person for what they did not do? That there is ultimately nothing to forgive. Well, in the case of somebody who's missing a loved one at the hands of someone else, their experience is different.
Our experience is different, but it's an experience of what the Course says is ultimately a dream world. And what happens in dreams doesn't really happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that when it's something like a daughter or a father or something like that, or spouse, it feels extremely real because the sense of contact we have with that person has suddenly been ripped away. But if the Course is right, and as so many other teachings have said, if this world is an illusion, if it's a dream, we know that what happens in dreams doesn't really happen.
Yeah, and that goes back to your previous point that really what the Course is asking us for is a fundamental change in our view of what reality is itself.
Exactly.
And when you have that change, then it's easier to accept some of all of what happens here on Earth is ultimately not real.
Yeah, and this is why, as you just said, that the teaching is so crucial, because unless form is not real, then an attack on us in form is a real attack. It does real damage, and then there's no basis for letting go of that perception that we were attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And then forgiveness as the letting go of the perception doesn't make sense.
Okay, so then how do you square that with going through the world and being present in the world of form and not retreating from the world of form, but going through it with the understanding that it's not real? Again, I don't want these teachings to be used as an excuse to withdraw from the world,
Yeah.
but to give everyone a new understanding of what the world really is. Those are two different things.
Yeah, well, from the Course's standpoint, we're trying to engage with, have relationships with, help and heal the minds in the world. And we have to do that because we're not all accomplished telepaths. We have to do that using the forms, using our bodies to speak words, for instance. So we engage in the world not because form is real, but because we have to relate through form to reach those minds which are real.
Yeah, and when the Course says that our function on Earth is healing, then we're using the form of our body. If we think about what it means to go through our day, not viewing ourselves as being attacked all day, but as using our form as a means by which we heal all day, then that's the shift that we need in order to make sense of this change in reality itself, right? So nothing is ultimate. We're still in this illusion, but at the same time, while we're in it, we have a function here of healing. And if we can have that as our mindset, then we go through our day differently.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not about the forms; it's about the minds. But because we all believe in those forms and are mainly aware of those forms, we work with them and through them to reach the minds,
Right. To heal the mind.
to heal the minds. Yeah, yeah. So to me, the seventh point, to get back to the happy fiction point, um, it's really important because when you think there's something really there to forgive, then suddenly it doesn't make that much sense to forgive it. If there is a real sin there, if our brother really did do something, if there's something to forgive, then it doesn't even make sense to do the forgiving. To me, this point greases the wheels of forgiveness, because by saying that ultimately there's nothing to forgive, forgiveness is an illusion, now it's like, well, okay, so it makes sense to let go of my anger if my anger never had any basis in the first place. It makes sense to forgive if there's nothing to forgive.
Yeah, but that's just such a lofty perspective because we absolutely feel justified in our anger.
Right. And as long as we do, forgiveness is impossible.
Yeah. But there's a biological thing that happens though. I mean, it's not just like when we feel attacked, we are physically different. And so it's not just a mental thing you have to work through. It's your whole body. Your cortisol's pumping, your face is red. I mean, we
But that's all mediated through our interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, I
right?
get that the
If you were
interpretation happens.
unconscious, if you were anesthetized, all those things wouldn't be happening because you wouldn't have a mental awareness and interpretation of the attack.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying also is that that's the thing we get lost in. So it's not even when you're in that state of rage, you're not thinking, well, this is happening because I'm interpreting it differently than I should be. You're just lost in it. And
Right.
so um, if somebody finds themselves in that state, do you have, I want to get you back on your paper, and I know we don't have a lot of time here, but when we get lost in that state, how do we bring ourselves back to this? What
With the
advice do you
practice.
have?
That's what the course says all throughout is when you notice you're having some reaction, say these words. And
Mm-hmm.
there's, hundreds of examples of what the words are, but we're supposed to be watching out for the reactions and responding with something from the course. And, those words, words are powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And those words can stop the emotions in their tracks. That doesn't happen every time, but I've experienced it countless times.
What do you say?
Depends on what lesson I'm doing.
Is there a
But
go-to for you?
I mostly go to my lesson for the day, and then I'll have some favorite ones.
Which are?
Well, one of my favorites is I place the future in the hands of God. I also have certain forgiveness ones. Forgiveness is the only gift I give because it is the only gift I want, and everything I give myself. It's a favorite of
I
mine.
could be still in a moment and go home all the time. I could be,
Yeah,
I will be still
a
in a
moment.
moment and go home. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So,
I could see peace instead of this.
that's a big favorite of course students. Yeah, that's a great one. The thing is that the words we tell ourselves in our head, they make a difference, and if we tell ourselves different ones, our emotions can change on a dime.
Yeah. I think that's a good technique, a good just practical technique to have that a go-to phrase, a go-to lesson that you employ whenever you catch yourself in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're
All right.
supposed to be doing that if we're doing the workbook, we're supposed to be doing that with each
All
day's
the
lesson.
time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Number 8. We forgive not just to relieve our sense of bitterness and woundedness, but primarily to feel forgiven ourselves. We forgive in order to relieve the underlying guilt caused by our unforgiveness. Now, it's become really, I think, rooted conventional wisdom that we forgive not to release the other person, but just to feel free of that bitterness ourselves, right? Unforgiveness is like taking the poison and expecting the other guy to die.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all heard that. Um, and in the Course, I can't find references to forgiving for that reason. I think it's assumed anger eats you up inside, and letting it go, relieves you and brings peace. But the reason the Course always gives for forgiving is because we feel guilty for our unforgiveness. And that's the real source of our wound. It's not what they did to us. We feel wounded by our unloving reaction to them, our unforgiving reaction. And so we forgive to let that go and feel forgiven ourselves.
That is the thing that we do not want to look at, because what we do is we blame the other person for what they've done, and we never really look at ourselves and our own unloving reaction to whatever it is that they did. We just refuse to look
Yeah.
at it.
And look at how toxic our blame is.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I want to sit on this one for a while, because this is what I, I we're so bad at this collectively. And I think it's the root of so much pain and so much suffering to others and within ourselves.
Yeah. Just the very thought that what I'm really hurting over is my own unloving reaction to what you did. That's causing me guilt. That's just a very, very different view of what my pain is about.
Yeah. Yeah, because our pain is always projected outward. It's what they did or that circumstance. You did a workshop in Sedona last year, and you quoted a line from the Course that says, those who attack are poor, their poverty asks for gifts. And I love that, where if you can just get in that frame of mind of if someone is attacking you, they're actually asking for your gift of love.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, we're not so good at that. So if we can express love in the face of an attack, my God, what kind of people would we be?
And how we feel about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Course is getting at, is that we feel awful about ourselves when we respond with righteous anger.
Right. But even if we respond with love, there's still going to an attack, there's still going to be some temptation in us to be like, aren't I loving in the face of your attack? I know.
Well, yeah. I mean, the ego is just relentless.
Yeah.
It just looks for any opening it has at all.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and read a couple. There's a couple formula statements that are so important, I think, to the Course as a whole. And I just want to read them and look at them for a second here. So one is from lesson 122 in the workbook, and it says, forgive and be forgiven. As you give, you will receive, meaning as you give forgiveness, you will receive forgiveness. There is no plan but this for the salvation of the Son of God. So the plan is we give forgiveness, and then we feel forgiven. We receive forgiveness. That says that first we give it to somebody else, but it also says we give it in order that we feel forgiven ourselves.
By the other person?
I think that can be part of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't necessarily need them to forgive us in return.
But that's the thing. We don't need God to forgive us in return because he's never condemned. So who are we receiving forgiveness from?
Really from ourselves, because we'll only permit ourselves to feel forgiven if we give it.
Mm-hmm. I love the line, there is no plan but this for the salvation of the Son of God. What a statement. There is no plan but this.
Yeah. And the next one says something similar. I already quoted this, but I'll read it again. Forgiveness is the only gift I give because it is the only gift I want. And everything I give myself. This is salvation's simple formula. That's almost the same as there is no plan but this for the salvation of the Son of God. Now, so that line, which I've repeated countless times, there's so much in that. So it's the only gift I give because it's the only gift I want. So the main gift I want is forgiveness. And I give it because everything I give myself. And that's how I find salvation. So I'm forgiving not to relieve my bitterness. It's mainly to relieve my guilt over being unforgiving.
Yeah, but we're not in touch with that either. We're not in touch with forgiveness as the only gift that we want. There's a long list of things we think we want, and forgiveness would be on there, but certainly not at the top.
Well, and that's another way of saying that we're not in touch with what the Course says about our pain, which is that guilt is the sole source of pain.
Say more about that.
Well, from the Course's standpoint, we're pure, holy beings, and we feel we've turned ourselves into sinners by being unloving, attacking, egotistical. And so at the heart of our pain is I was pure, and now look at me. I'm a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we submerge that and we tell ourselves a different story about our pain. And based on the different story, there are different solutions. So we have to, get down to the root of what we're really hurting over, or else we're going to seek solutions that don't fit the actual source of the pain.
But the different story is that we're still innocent and someone else is guilty. And so that's the story that we tell ourselves, and that's the loop we get into.
On the surface, we're saying, well, I'm innocent, you're the guilty party, and that's hiding the fact that deep down what we're really hurting over is the belief that we've turned ourselves into, well, The Course says we've made a devil of the Son of God.
Mm-hmm. When we were talking about this podcast before we hit record, one thing that you said that I thought was so interesting is we've divorced forgiveness from love. And can you say something about that in relation to this point?
Well, I think one of the things we do is we say, I'm forgiving just to relieve my own bitterness, has nothing to do with you. I'm not trying to do a favor for you. You're still that person who deserves my anger, but I'm going to forgive because it's really, eroding my peace of mind to be so angry. Well, that doesn't sound like love at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's actually gets us to our next point, which we probably should get to.
Go for it.
Okay, number 9. Our forgiveness is also aimed at releasing our brother by giving him the message that he never sinned. It is thus not true that forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person. So in the Course, forgiveness is aimed at releasing the other person. And that's an essential part of how it releases us. I'll just read a couple of passages here. These are both from The Obstacles to Peace in chapter 19 of the text. The sentence sin would lay upon him, he can escape with your forgiveness. The other one says, forgive the sins your brother thinks he has committed and all the guilt you see in him. Join him in gladness and remove all trace of guilt from his disturbed and tortured mind. Help him to lift the heavy burden of sin you laid upon him and he accepted as his own, and toss it lightly and with happy laughter away from him. So the idea is there we are overtly pictured as relieving the guilt our brother is carrying with our forgiveness. And go ahead.
No,
you
go
ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
And this is essential to how the Course sees forgiveness releasing us. Because if we can be the releaser, if we can be the one who's healed somebody else, that says something about us. It says we're pure.
And it also says that they're pure too, because I love this concept that we think the person who has attacked us is fundamentally impure, that they take some pleasure in attacking us. And what this is saying is, no, they're hurting too.
They're hurting from guilt.
They're hurting from guilt too. And that your forgiveness can relieve that in them. And so no matter what it's easy to dehumanize someone in the face of an attack, right? But when you can not only see the light in them beyond the form of their body, but see the pain in them that they're feeling from what they've done to you, then that enables you to get in touch with that compassion too.
And the Course does talk about that.
Well, clearly it does. You just read a quote.
Well, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
What you mean is it talks about it in multiple places.
Yeah. So part of forgiveness is it's a natural reaction to seeing that somebody is actually in the distress of guilt over what they've done. And we all hide that. So you have to almost see below the surface. Mm-hmm. It's not on the surface very often. But if we can see that, then forgiveness is the natural reaction.
Yeah. And again, that's an evolved perspective, because their behaviors, their outward behaviors towards you are often in their own form of righteous anger. And so they're not showing you. It's easier to forgive someone who is showing you their pain as a result of their own unloving behavior or their own attack.
Way easier.
But oftentimes they're not. They're not.
Yeah.
And to still maintain this perspective in the face of that, and to see that no matter what their behavior is displaying, there is something in them that is very pained by what they've done. Even though
there's a certain amount of faith.
Yeah,
there's a certain amount of faith involved, because they're not going to show it to you most of the time.
They're not going to show it to you, yeah. So,
Anyway, my big point here is that forgiveness is aimed at releasing the other person from their guilt by telling them they've never sinned. And you don't have to tell them that with your words, although there are times when maybe it's appropriate. But we're not just trying to relieve our own burden of anger or whatever we're trying to relieve in ourselves. We're trying to set them free, because the only way to really come to believe in ourselves again is to be one who sets others free.
yeah. I remember one time we were talking about forgiveness, and I love the line you said. It's not from the course, but you said sometimes forgiveness is having that conversation again and again, and sometimes forgiveness means not having to have that conversation again at all. And part of letting the other person go, I think, is not reminding them so often of the ways in which they've pained us.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
we do. We can't
Yeah.
let them get too far down the path, because we have to let them know that they hurt us to bring them back through their guilt. And that's a cycle that we get into again and again and again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just love this idea. Just let them go. Let them go.
Yeah. There's a great phrase in the course that talks about itemizing error. That's what we do. We itemize their errors.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not going to be able to find it. Yeah. Go on to your next point, and I'll see if I can find something in the Song of Prayer that I think is speaking to that as well.
Okay. So, 10th and final point is through releasing our brother, seeing him healed, and receiving his gratitude, which is part of the process. Doesn't always happen, but it does happen as part of the process. So, we can start again. Through releasing our brother, through our forgiveness, seeing him healed, the effects of our forgiveness, and receiving his gratitude, we gain a new perception of ourselves. To paraphrase lesson 121, we awaken from the dream that we are mortal, fallible, and full of sin, and know we are the perfect Son of God. And that's the ultimate objective in the course, that our forgiveness convinces us that we're not mortal, we're not fallible, we're not full of sin. It convinces us we're the perfect Son of God. Now, how can forgiveness convince us we're the perfect Son of God unless it is some sublime, elevated form of forgiveness, unless we are seeing our brother as some kind of elevated being? As long as we're just, in the usual playing ground of, you're my mirror and you're showing me something about my ego and I'm grateful for that, it's an opportunity, we're staying on this level. We can't elevate our view of ourselves to we're the perfect Son of God unless we're doing something similar with the person we're forgiving.
Yeah. Yeah. So seeing the truth of them is what enables you to see the truth in yourself.
Yeah. And you're hopefully lifting your perception of both of you way beyond where it is now.
Yeah. And that's where we need help, because again, it goes back to that example that you always give. We always look to the problem, the solution to our problems right next to the problem itself. And what we're trying to do is bring in some way higher form of wisdom. And that's exactly what this is. Because who would come to this perspective on forgiveness alone?
Well, I don't think anybody ever has.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's incredible.
Yeah. It's incredible. And I do think that forgiveness, as the course understands it, it's just something, it's a long process, like you said earlier. We grow into it by increments. But we can grow into it. Basically it involves letting go of the ego. The ego can't forgive. And letting go of the ego is a huge thing. So we do it in steps. We do it incrementally.
Do you think we can really let go of the ego here?
Well, I think that's where we're headed. I think very, very few have done it yet.
We can get
I
closer
think
and closer. We can loosen its grip for sure.
absolutely we shed bits of it all the time. We just have to, keep doing more of that and hopefully speed it up. But forgiveness is the ideal, ego buster, right? The ego can't forgive. By forgiving, we are shedding the ego.
And that's why we said in the introduction that it's the course's central teaching. It's because this is how you bust it up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And another way of talking about that is we're replacing the ego with love. Forgiveness in the Course is, it calls it an earthly form of love.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving love to the person who we formerly gave condemnation to.
Hmm. Yeah, so we can give salvation where we before we gave condemnation.
Yeah, yeah, and forgiveness so often these days is divorced from love, and we need to have a form of forgiveness that is so loving. It's about lifting up the other person. It's about releasing the other person, and in the process, we find out that we are more loving beings than we ever guessed we were.
So it is your mirror at the end of the day. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right, Robert, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say about forgiveness before we close? I know you have to go teach a class here in 5 minutes.
I do. Well, we were going to mention that composite forgiveness exercise.
Oh, and I've left so much time for that.
Yeah, I'll just mention very briefly. There are 6 lessons in the workbook that have us pick one person or more than one person to forgive, and they take us through a process of forgiving that person, and then also receiving the benefit of what we gave. And I thought, if these are 6 workbook lessons we're explicitly taken through a forgiveness process, let's look at the commonalities between them. And so I looked at any themes that occur in at least 2 of the 6 exercises, and out of that assembled an overall process, because there is kind of a skeleton that comes out of that, where we get in touch with our current view of that person, and then we negate that view by repeating lines from the Course, and these lines invite a whole new view of that person, and in the process they invite a new view of ourselves as well. And so I took that skeleton and filled it out with passages from throughout the Course that we repeat, and it's just something that I've gotten massive benefit from over the years, and I know many other people have benefited a lot from it as well. So we wanted to just sort of attach it to the podcast for that reason.
Yeah, and this How Do We Forgive? A composite forgiveness exercise is available in the show notes for this episode. And what I just love about this process, Robert, is that, again, sometimes people will say, okay, I get that I'm supposed to forgive. I understand it's essential teaching, but how do I do it? And what you've done here is really helpful in that regard. So thank you.
I've just taken the how that's already there and drawn it out. I mean, I think we skip over those hows and then we say, hey, where does it teach us how to do it?
Right. But yes, very, very helpful exercise. And all right, with that, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close?
Oh, there's so much this is such an endless topic. I wish we could have said so much more, but I guess there's nothing more to say right now.
I think we need to do another podcast on vision, on seeing through the eyes of Christ, and how we can look at others, and how the Course asks us to do that. And so if forgiveness rests on that shift in perspective, then let's do an episode on that as well.
Yeah, we should. I mean, they're closely related topics.
Mm-hmm.
And vision's a favorite topic of mine. So absolutely.
All right. Next one then, huh?
Sure. Why not?
All right. Cool. Robert, thank you so much. And I'll see you next time for a discussion on vision.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.